Okay, hello, Internet family. This is Anjanette Potter, also known as Adam's Rib. And due to technical difficulties, I sound all nice and official. Due to technical difficulties, I won't be able to do Eclectic Music Geek tonight. I'm having difficulties with the mic. So so what I'll do is move it back a night. And try it from my laptop this time, tomorrow night. Evidently, because I wanted to do it from my phone because I didn't feel like wrestling with my laptop because sometimes it acts up, but now my phone is showing that sometimes it can act a fool as well. So what I'm going to do, so tomorrow night's show, I will be going ahead and going live, doing live broadcasts to tomorrow night. I don't want to go too far back. As far as when I do them, I like to try to do them as fresh off the presses, and at the rate that the world is losing people, I don't really want to take any more chances. Um, but tomorrow night's show will be dedicated to some of our musical legends and people that we have lost just here recently and everything. So let me see here. So I will be featuring, let me see here, the music of, so tomorrow night, so tonight was supposed to be dedicated to Lisa Marie Presley, Anita Pointer, Jeff Beck, David Crosby, C.J. Harris, who many of you remember from American Idol, I believe it was, or The Voice. Fred White, who was a member of Earth, Wind, and Fire, and Gangsta Boo, who many of you know from 3 6 Mafia. So I thought it was ironic, that Gangsta Boo left us because she was just on Marriage Boot Camp. And her I'm gonna say this. Um I honestly believe that it seems like there's been a lot of hassle for Black women lately. And much of it has been due to the same old unfair stereotyping that we have had to deal with, really since we got here, since we got off the first slave ship. Um, I remember when First Lady Michelle Obama first got into office, it seemed like she was forever being labeled angry, even when she wasn't angry. Like you, like she could say something, and somebody would interpret it as angry, even when she wasn't being angry. Now, that's kind of one of the many microaggressions and racial gaslighting that a lot of Black women have to deal with. If we're a little too firm, and let me say this, I think that it is an offset of, like, say a white woman has to be firm with a white guy. It's interpreted as angry or bitter or whatever. But a white guy, I don't know if you all have seen the tape of Bill O'Reilly that has made the internet here recently on different places like especially Watch Mojo or Miss Mojo out of that network, because it's included in many of their countdowns, information overload, different YouTube channels like that, where they're talking about different times where media people, weren't very professional. And like I said, a white guy can throw a complete temper tantrum, and it is never interpreted the same as it is when it's a woman. You could be merely standing up for yourself, and all of a sudden, you're a diva. You're a what is the new Nick Karen? Which is kind of one of the reasons why, even though the term Karen seemed to start with the Black community, and we know why we say it. It's the very entitled older white woman who always has to speak to your manager and throws a fit over little or nothing. And a lot of it is racist because she doesn't she doesn't care too much for change. She doesn't care too much for the fact that there are people working there that aren't her color. And so she decides to pick a fight or find a way to complain about you, because hopefully if she makes enough noise, they'll get rid of you. I mean, that's really where a lot of that comes. But the problem with labels like that are aimed at women, oftentimes you will get called a Karen for stuff that doesn't make you a Karen. And if white women get it, guess where Black women get it? That whole level of intersect that says you're a woman. Not only are you a woman, and not only are your complaints not valid, but you're a Black woman or woman of color. So your stuff, whatever we don't think is serious, when it comes to white women, it definitely isn't serious when it comes to women of color or Black women. Okay? So if you're considered, and it also comes in degrees, it depends on your level of attractiveness too, as to how well you're being paid attention to. And so when I see that, I've seen it a lot on reality television when you're talking about women in relationships, when they go on the relationship shows like Marriage Boot Camp and different others. It's almost as though Black women are constantly being labeled controlling or angry or aggressive or loud. Comedian D.L. Hughley has had this saying, and I kind of copped it a little bit. I always give him credit for it though. And he says, you're always too loud for people who don't intend to hear you. Because, being called loud and combative and different loud, combative, this, that, and the other is really a microaggression against you even having a voice at all, or sticking up for yourself at all, or, just wanting to be able to have a say. I've seen this commercial here recently, and it's been two white guys, but it's still really funny. So the one white guy is apprenticing for the other. It's set back in sort of historical, medieval, maybe a little bit, in the days where people did a lot of apprenticing. And the one white guy says to the other white guy, these are two white guys now. And so the one says, well, can I do, I've been an apprentice. I remember the days when I apprenticed when I was first starting off in hair, and how anxious you are to do the thing that you were hired to come in there and do. You're anxious, you're ready to get, because you're the apprentice, because you're the trainee, like every time somebody called in sick and they let me get on the floor to cut hair, I was so excited because I was ready to cut some hair. I was ready to show, my stuff, ready to earn my keep. And not that I wasn't earning it by answering phones and folding towels and, doing the laundry and prepping the customers for the other for the other hairstylists. But it was something I readily did it because, that was also part of paying dues. And at that time in Columbus, you could rarely find any salon, black or white, that was hiring people and letting them get right on the floor and do hair. Just about every, even private salons, had their own training program that you had to go through in order to be able to get on the floor and do hair. Not even black salons weren't either. Like you had to do other stuff. They didn't let you you couldn't get in there. And at the time, the Carefree Curls and all that was out, I probably did about Lord knows how many Carefree Curls on family members. So I knew what I was doing. It didn't matter. They didn't let nobody on the floor right out of beauty school and right out of beauty school and right after being licensed. Nobody did. Penzones didn't. No one. Like you basically had to go through that training. And while you were going through that training, you basically were, you were a trainee. That means while you're doing that, you're the receptionist, you're answering phones, you're doing all of that. And so, I kind of understood that really well. Well, I'm looking at this commercial and the guy asked the guy he was training under, like, do you want me, can I do blah, blah, blah? And the guy looks at him and says, are you trying to run things? And I'm like, oh my gosh, if he doesn't sound like a former pastor of mine who is now deceased, basically you're showing that you have the gifting, you're showing that you have the call, and you are, winning people to Christ, you're ministering. I hadn't got up and done any public preaching, but I was giving testimonies. You're doing, what underlings do. And all of a sudden, and because you're a woman and you're answering the call to ministry, you're being accused of trying to run things. And really, you're just answering. You're either now in this case, because of this denomination, they were hiding the fact that there was a lot of sexual misconduct going on. And so you have to always wonder when people shame you for things, pay attention to what they're shaming you for. I watched a fellow YouTuber earlier today, and he did a commentary on Bebe's Kids, the movie Bebe's Kids, and I personally thought the movie was funny. So if you are not familiar with the concept of Bebe's Kids has kind of evolved. Bebe's Kids was based on a comic routine by a late comic legend in the making. He was still relatively new, but you knew this man was about to do some great things with his comedy, and his name was Robin Harris. So those of you who that go that far back, you remember Robin Harris from the first House Party movie where he played the father of Kid from Kid and Play. And He was like everything that man did. He was in Do the Right Thing. Everything he did, everything he touched turned to gold. He was that funny, and he is very, very much missed. He's now deceased, but he is very much missed. He, like I said, legend in the making, and so he had gotten to the point where was given an HBO special of his own. And if you know anything about the standing room only specials on HBO that were given to comics, that's not something that they just hand out to anybody. Not even white comics. Like you have to be when you get your own special. If you get your own special on HBO, that means you have arrived. Well, he was starting to get movie parts when he passed, and so the concept of Bebe's Kids was a joke that he did as part of that Showtime special. And they wound up, and people were so impressed with it. Every time a person saw a really, really bad kid, they called them a Bebe kid. They even called grown people that didn't act right a Bebe kid. Like, are you being a Bebe's kid? Me and my godmother were calling people Bebe's kids all the time. And so they finally made the movie Bebe's Kids. And the movie was based on that particular joke. And so this young man did a social commentary on it, and he did a really good job. I can't remember the name of the YouTube channel. When I come back on tomorrow night, when I can get my little sound equipment together, I will have the name of that channel for you. But he did a really good thing. He did a deep dive, and he talked about why Bebe's Kids were the way they were. He also talked about, he not only discussed Bebe's Kids, but he also discussed the young woman that Mr. Harris was trying to take out, and the difference between why her son was so well behaved versus why Bebe's Kids were so well behaved. And he said, without thinking about it, he touched on the fact that the film seemed to talk about different areas of toxicity. And I won't say just for the Black community, really for all communities, how bullies are formed and everything. Because usually, especially if it's a childhood bully, there's usually some stuff going on wrong in that kid's house. And I can say, I remember Good Times, the TV show Good Times, did a episode on Michael Evans had a bully. And so Michael Evans found a way to deal with his bully without having to beat him up. Because usually most people are like, well, stand up to him and different other stuff like that. Well, what Michael did was he invited the bully home with him for the weekend. And, it was another situation where the young man was not being taken care of very well. I'm not saying that for all bullies. Some people are bullies because they come from a background where they are very, very, very entitled. I remember this white girl on the internet, on social media, saying, if his name ends with the third, you are looking at somebody that's more likely going to be very entitled. So, giving your kids too many rewards without requiring anything out of them, or not showing them any any consequences. I had consequences. I think in the Black community, we get that thing twisted. We want to call kids spoiled because their parents can afford to keep a roof over their head, food in their belly, and make sure they have everything they need. That doesn't make you spoiled, okay? And some of our references, if your references are Mr. from Color Purple, or, Monique's character from Precious Mama. Okay. In other words, if your background was pretty abusive. And I'm not calling all Black parents abusive. Most of us aren't. Most of us, even though, we still need to find a way other than spanking to punish bad behavior in our children, most of us are largely pretty emotionally supportive of our children. We give our children what we can. I remember, earlier today thinking about my own children. I'm like, I've always tried to be supportive because I always wanted to give my children what I never had. I would have traded a few material things for some emotional support. Okay. And I think sometimes we get so busy trying to take care of the material part, especially if you came from a background where you didn't have much materially, that we forget that kids need your emotional support as well. One of the things that he said about the good, the kid that was well behaved but not very confident, was that his mother was his safe place, like all parents should be. And I thought that was interesting because I've been, I've been reading comments. I've made mention that I've been reading comments, Reddit comments. Somebody has taken the time to take the Reddit posts and make a video out of the comments that show up in response to the Reddit posts. And so to hear some of these people's childhood, some people have had some really horrible childhoods. Horrible. Not just horrible, not just poverty stricken, but it just makes you wonder why some people have kids. And so when I hear the women who say they don't want, they ain't got no kids, the childless movement, which is so insensitive. And I'll tell you why. Women who don't have children, women who are childless for many reasons. I remember one of my favorite aunts, my dad's younger sister, for the longest time, didn't think she was going to be able to have kids. She didn't think it was going to happen. One of the devil's best things to say to us, well, it ain't going to happen. Satan uses discouragement a lot. And I always, whenever I feel discouraged, I will post, it's going to happen. God has the ability to make whatever you want to happen, happen. And it is always good to listen closely to his voice. And I can remember my Aunt Gerlina made up for not having any children by loving on me and her nieces and nephews on her husband's side. So she kind of kept us every weekend. We would go over her house every weekend. And, she would come by bus if she had to come and pick me up from my grandmother's house over in Maslin to pick me up. She would get rides. She would give people gas money to come and get me. But if she couldn't get a ride because she didn't have a car, she would come herself on the bus to come and get me. And on RTA, I think it was RTA in Canton, their answer to what we in Columbus call CODA. She would take the bus to come and get me. As soon as my mother's mother, my grandmother, who had custody, who, had me at the time, and that's, another story that I'm not going to go into right now. But, my mother, because of her hours and everything, had a difficult time finding anyone who could keep me during those hours. So I wound up living with my grandmother in Maslin. And my mother, even after, I lived there, my mother came, faithfully every other weekend to come and visit me and, would give my grandmother money for my upkeep and everything. And so I remember my grandmother on my dad's side and my aunt coming to visit one time. And so as soon as they got the okay to be able to come and visit me and pick me up and take me over to Canton to visit, they were right there. My aunt, every time she could, she would get on that bus and come and get me and bring me to her house. And she would take me wrestling. That's why I know so much about some of this wrestling that we see every so often. I'll watch some wrestling, and it brings me back to that happy place where we used to go. I think the big one when I was younger was Tony Marino, but I remember all the other guys too. I even remember Dwayne Johnson, The Rock's dad. So he was kind of in that circle and everything. My aunt was a big fan of Tony Marino. So every time they came to Canton, every time the wrestling guys would come to Canton, my aunt would make sure to go and see them. And they had their villains and this, that, and the other, and the whole questionable thing as to whether or not what they were doing was real. I want to get into arguments about that. So one of the reasons I'm really crazy about The Rock is because of, you know, it feels good to see him doing what he's doing now with his acting and everything, and the fact that he's a good looking man doesn't hurt. But I just remember she would come and get me, and faithfully come and get me, and finally she was able. I remember when she called and told me she was pregnant with my little cousin Talise, and I was like really really happy for her because she had been wanting a kid. She had been wanting a child of her own for the longest time, and I don't think people understand what it's like to want something of your own. You could be happy for everybody else, but it's something when you are able to finally get your own. And she got pregnant with her. I was around 11 years old. And I remember when she, said she was going to have a baby. I'm like, you're going to have a baby? And I was like, wow, because for the longest time, and people don't understand the frustration and how a lot of women feel. Many people are not childless by choice. Some people are childless because they've tried to get pregnant and it just didn't happen. And so when you're on these social media sites and, we don't want no kids and you're snot nosed brats and this, that, and the other, I'm like, I think you need to recognize that some women are not childless by choice. Some women, found for whatever reason, found that they were not able to conceive. And so, I think you have to be careful when you are judging women who can have kids. And I remember being at a church and, being sensitive to the fact that that particular pastor and his wife never had children. And I always got the feeling that she was a little jealous of those of us, especially, if you don't get something and you look up at somebody that you feel is less deserving of that thing than you are. And I always felt like she was a little mean spirited toward women who had children out of wedlock because, here she is, she waited or whatever, or she did the good girl thing. Got married first and then tried to conceive with her husband. And, it didn't happen. And so you have to watch. I mean, because many times we can be that way when it comes to a mate. You look up and you see these women who are complete bitches and they got a man that's standing by them even in their bitchery. Okay, and here you are, a good woman, and it seems like men are just looking at you and just want to take advantage of you. So as sisters in this thing, we're in this thing together. We need to be sensitive to each other's pain, regardless of what that pain is. Even if somebody has kids and their kids seem to be determined to drag them through a whole bunch of hell, I feel fortunate with my children, even though things are not always, as good as they could be. I feel fortunate, like I tell people, I don't have no regrets about having mine, Even, even with the mismatched baby daddy thing, even with the whole, being born out of wedlock thing, I'm grateful because there's a lot of women who would love to be mothers and aren't able to be. Okay, so we always have to be mindful of what each other is going through. You don't know who around you secretly is suffering silently and doesn't have their life the way they want it, or things didn't work out the way they wanted. You have to be sensitive to that. We have to always remember. I heard somebody say, take my little saying about us being in it together and called it hokey. I'd rather be hokey and give you the encouragement that you need. One of the things that I remember getting credit for at one of the churches I went to was having the gift of encouragement. I wear that proudly. If I'm able to lift you out of a dark place, then that blesses me. When I'm able to tell you that you have a right to change your life for the better, and you get a hold of that thing and you decide to make positive changes and realize that in Christ, you have the ability, you don't got to stay stuck in your past. There are so many people right now that have addictions that they're fighting on a regular basis, that have old behavior that they fight on a regular basis, that those old demons keep showing up. There are people who have children that are now grown that remember when they weren't the parent that they should have been. Okay, and having the ability to forgive yourself of anything you did in your past that was unwholesome. I remember the hard time that people gave Cardi B from making the transition to going to rapping and being good at rapping. When I hear people tell certain women that they're only good for sex, and I'm like, the devil is a liar. There's no such thing as a woman who's only good for sex. And don't agree with these men when they say that about these women. All of y'all have gifts and talents that you have the ability to uncover. Okay? Nothing brings it out like, different things bring that out. But just know that every single one of y'all got gifts and talents that if you uncover them, you will set the world on fire. So never let anybody tell you all you're good for. Because let's face it, everybody's demographic has something negative associated with it. I just recently came out of a situation where a denomination tried to prostitute me. Tried to traffic me. I'll tell you again, I'm nobody's prostitute. I ain't cut out for that mess. And many times people say stuff to you because they really don't mean you're no good. Okay? White people wonder why black women are so angry. Many times black women are angry because, number one, we were brought here against our will. Our free will has always been in question. Our sexual agency, our ability to govern our own bodies has always been a problem. People labeling you, I remember when I was younger, there were times where I felt like I had to have 2 hymens compared to every white girl's 1 hymen. Because you have white guys that were taught by even more ignorant white guys that black women that it was okay to rape us, that it was okay to use us and the other thing, use us for sex when they couldn't get a white girl. There are times when I get sick and tired of white fetishization. I get sick and tired of it. Well, I can't get nobody else white, so let me dip over here in these communities of color. I'm not that person. I'm not your fetish. I'm not your stage. I'm not your phase. I am a person. So when I say, when I'm, saving sex for marriage, I could care less if you feel frustrated because you can't get laid. That's not my problem. Nor is it any other woman's problem. We are people. Women are people. Black women are people. Asian women are people. Like I said, like I'm not trying to do Donald Trump for another. I kept my word. I voted for Biden. I voted for Hillary. I'm not voting for Donald Trump. I would choose an immigrant any day over any of these white males who overthink the fact that they are qualified to lead, and there are many of them that, Lord knows, please have several seats. Okay, because you are running us into the toilet. I would take Latins any day. I would take any of them. Okay, we are people. People of color are people. We are not your fetish. We are not your phase. And, all of us have gone through a little bit of a phase at some point in our youth when we were learning how to have relationships with people and learning how to navigate that whole thing of our romantic life. But we're not phases. We are not white people's phase. I still am paying attention to the YouTuber that talks about interracial dating in Brazil as a result of racism. The black people who think that by producing a light-skinned child, that they're making that child's way better, that they're lightening the family line. Now, it's not the racism that's on the part of the black people that's causing that. It's a long-standing history of white privilege, white supremacy, and white racism. When you've had 300-400 years of being told that you're too dark, that you're inferior because you're too dark, that you're not as attractive because you're too dark, that all you are good for is a good roll in the hay, but you're not qualified to be anybody's wife because you're too dark. So some of y'all men, when you talk to women, you need to pay attention to what you're saying to us. And some of you, if I could curse you with anything, I would curse you with daughters. Every single one of you mugs that don't treat women right, I would curse you with daughters if I wasn't suspicious that you would do damage to yet another generation of women. Anyway, I was recently, so I got this app. I got this one app-based gig called Stringer. And so they pay you to go out and get footage of different events. So I wound up going to the anniversary of Roe v. Wade and taping those women, the key speakers and different stuff like that. And it was very interesting. It's interesting to see people who are on fire for the cause that they're on fire for, even if it's something that you're not necessarily on fire for. So I have, since I have found my voice as far as reconnecting with the whole women's movement and feminism, which I'm not putting down. And this month I'm going to talk about why I'm not putting it down. So I'm a pro-choice person, and I'm pro-choice because after everything that I went through at the last church I was at, I'm just like, right now, I just really don't trust men. I don't trust that men in the faith communities are making decisions that have women's best interests at heart. You can say a child has a right to life all you want to, but when you won't do anything about the men in your church that have a problem with recognizing women saying no, when you keep grooming women and all of these sexual misconduct that keeps going on in some of these churches, all the pastors who keep coercing women into returning to abusive men, all the false teachings that are running rampant in a lot of churches that really says we support abusive behavior and violence toward women and children. When you are targeting women for abuse, when pastors are targeting women for abuse and setting women up to be passed around, you don't have you're in the office that you hold, but you really are doing nothing but, there's sexual harassment going on. When the men in the faith community get their stuff together, pro-life may be a thing for me. But all I see with the pro-life stance right now is a bunch of men who are trying to roll back the clock. You resent the rights that women have. You resent the rights that people of color have. You don't like the fact that many of us are prospering. You don't like that Black women are some of the most educated people in the land. We're making progress, and you don't like it. You resent it. You resent the fact that many women are raising kids by themselves and doing a damn good job without having to deal with some raggedy man. There's a movie out, and I highly recommend you see it because it really touches on many of the things that women have had to go through, the mindsets that we've had to deal with. It's called This Boy's Life with Leonardo DiCaprio. And so the movie, it takes place at a time where, I think the woman was divorced or widowed. And so there was a lot more pressure on women to marry. That for whatever reason, people just had a problem with women being single and being able to raise their kids, mind their business, and take care of themselves. Even white women. Okay? And so she, her family members, that boy needs a man around. That boy needs a man. He needs a daddy. You need a husband. And so there are times when, with women, it's almost like we can't win for losing because you either have people who are determined to stick you with the wrong man. And so that's what happened. And this dude was a bully. He was very abusive. He bullied her son. And some of y'all know people that have been in that situation. I remember another movie called Raggedy Man with Sissy Spacek. And she was a young widowed mom. And, she was the local operator or whatever. It's a good movie. You really ought to see it. But it's also set in a time where, I don't know what it is. Like I said, a woman being single, raising her kids, minding her business. And, these local guys decided, this one local guy that wasn't wrapped too tight, decided that he was going to be her man, whether she wanted him to be her man or not. And so she did wind up getting romantically involved with another guy. It wasn't him, which really sent him through the roof. And so he got to the point where he was starting to prank her, which they weren't pranks. It was really just harassment. Okay. And, I don't want to tell you the rest of it just in case you decide to go and stream it. It is a very good movie, but they're movies that are set in a particular time where women didn't have a lot of rights. Okay. And when you don't have also a book series. I just recently saw a movie based on a book that I read years ago called Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. If you really want to think about why women are protesting and carrying signs, why Black people, are carrying signs, why people look into some of this literature that is based on those time periods and think about what all we had to go through. Okay? If you are, I recognize that the Bible doesn't support LGBTQ community, but are you really winning anybody with your God, The one church that every time we look around, they got their little God hates fag signs out, which I'm like, do you really think that you're helping the cause of Christ by being so daggone hateful? The word of God says that he that wins souls is wise. Now, I know what the Bible says about these lifestyles, but I also know that you don't win anybody by bombing their clinics, by taking violent actions, by walking around with God hates whoever signs running around, or you don't get anything done with hate. And you know it's not God's will for you to be a white supremacist, so please have several seats. You are not helping the cause of Christ. One of our primary missions as born again Christians on this earth is to create disciples. If you, as a man of God, cannot control your penis, what do you think that looks like? I remember preacher Joyce Meyer saying how she talked to this guy who committed adultery. He got caught up in sexual sin. He was married. She said, when you did that, you just made the rest of us look a whole lot worse. And she was talking about preachers. It's, the word of God says that an offended brother or sister is harder won than a strong city. Once you offend somebody, it is very hard to get that person to take you seriously when you're talking about the cause of Christ. I can't tell you how many people I've had to pray with that are suffering from having been hurt in a church. I remember witnessing with a woman who was a victim of a church split. So we want to be mindful, and we need to pray more about some of these conditions that are going on before you decide to be somebody's flying monkey and go jump on somebody because they offended your pastor. Defending your pastor, you need to find out that maybe your pastor is wrong. Some of your church leaders are wrong. And you are not helping the cause of Christ by protecting them when they rape people. Anyway, I'm going to get off here. And I am going to go live broadcast tomorrow night, even though I really like to reserve that kind of stuff for Friday nights so I can have my Saturday nights free. So we're going to see. If I don't, I will go live again tomorrow night and let you know when I will be doing the radio broadcast. So enjoy your weekend. Love on your grandbabies, your babies, your each other, and enjoy tonight. So 2 movies came out this weekend. There's, what is it, Shotgun Wedding, I think it is, with J-Lo and Lenny Kravitz, and it looks like it might be a little, cool. I don't know. I used to watch a lot of J-Lo's films. She's kind of become the queen of the rom-com to a degree. She's been busy and come a long way from Living Color. Okay. I still remember the one video that she was in when she was one of Janet Jackson's dancers and everything. So, wow. The other one is Eddie Murphy. I'm trying to remember who the lady is that's, playing his wife. Anyway, it's on Netflix, and so I'm like, cool. And with Eddie Murphy, I'm like, child, look how blessed. You know what I'm saying? I remember the first night that Eddie Murphy got up and did his stuff on Saturday Night Live. Because he's not much older than me. And so man, he blew the place away. Everybody just knew he was the next Richard Pryor. And no, he did not disappoint us at all. So it's good to see people that you remember 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago when they first started out, and they still in the game. That's always, it always feels good to see that. And to see them doing really well. like really well. I look now, I'm looking up the information now, and I may do a piece on that. Hip hop is celebrating a 50th anniversary, I think it is 40 or 50. I have to look that up. But it's like, I remember when so many rockers made fun of hip hop, like you ain't making no music, you talking. My remember my uncles are big time Motown people. And so they're like, what is that y'all listen to? They ain't doing no singing. They ain't making no music. They talking to the music. What is that? And now, people are requesting hip hop artists to, rap hooks all up in their music and everything. I'm like, and the funny thing to me with the rockers, I'm like, listen, I do a lot of music history. There was a time when people swore up and down rock wasn't gonna last. And look at all these rockers walking around here in their 80s and 90s, still rocking. And now, because of people on YouTube like me and different other people are talking about what they remember about them, they back in demand again. Mick Jagger is what, about 80 years old, and still out there. So, like I said, don't knock what nobody else is into. Don't knock what the young kids are into or whatever, unless it's satanic. And by all means, pray for your children. But it's so much stuff. Shoot, I remember all the way. I remember D.L. Hughley all the way back to Def Comedy Jam. I remember a lot of people all the way back to Def Comedy Jam. Yeah, I'm telling all y'all's ages. So I am going to get off here. Y'all have a good one. And I will talk to you again tomorrow night at midnight, whether I go live or whether I go ahead and go with the broadcast. I will talk to you later.